In this video, we are going to go through the Linux command line, and we're going to go everything from beginner to intermediate to advanced commands, and you'll learn everything that there is to know about navigating the Linux system and creating new directories, creating new files, managing files, searching through files, creating new users, creating new groups, and doing pretty much everything that there is to do as a system administrator on the Linux operating system. My name is Hank Hackerson, your host for today, and to find other videos like this and really any other type of video on cybersecurity, system administration, ethical hacking, pen testing, I encourage you to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so that you can join our community of amazing cybersecurity professionals and learn as much as you can about this amazing pathway. And as an extra incentive, if you're interested in furthering your education, we have the Hackaholics Anonymous community, which is essentially our YouTube membership program that includes everything for system administration, cybersecurity, pen testing, and just a tier for showing support if you're interested in that. I used to include this 15-minute video inside of all these videos, but I got some bad feedback about it. So now it's just going to be a very short plug to just remind you that this exists. So if you want to know what all of the different perks are, what all the great things are that you would get as a part of being a member in our membership community, I very much encourage you to click on this video. Even if you don't want to watch the whole thing, you can just go through the read more section right here and just look at the breakdown of all of our membership perks. There's a lot of perks. This is not something that we just say, hey, you know what, if you want to become a supporter, go ahead and give me whatever amount of dollars per month. We actually give a lot of great perks in exchange for the membership contribution that people make to join our community. So I'm very, very excited about it. It's something that I worked very, very hard for to make sure that we give real value to our members. And if you're interested in getting any of those membership perks, I very much encourage you check out Hackaholics Anonymous. All right, without further ado, let's jump into this. So there are some basic, like very, very, very basic commands that you need to know as a system administrator if you're trying to get good at the Linux operating system or any of its other variations, because there's so many different variations inside of Linux. So this could be I think there's one called Parrot, there's Ubuntu, obviously, there's Kali Linux, there's so many different versions of Linux, but it all runs the same way. And actually Mac OS also runs on Unix, which is the original language that was developed prior to Linux launching and becoming an operating system. So Unix is the foundational language that both Linux and Mac OS operate off of. So a lot of these commands, almost all of these commands, are also going to work on a Mac OS system. So just in case you want to kind of know what the two general sets of languages are, there's the Windows version of the command line, and then there's the Unix Linux version of the command line, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, the Unix Linux version. And there are some really basic commands that you just need to know. We'll call these the basic bash commands that you need to know. And these are things like, for example, uname. So if I just type in uname, it'll says, hey, I'm Linux, right? This is the name of the system itself. Then you can do uname a, and that'll bring all of the information, right? So it brings the actual name of the system that we're in. It also brings the IP address or the username. So this would technically be the username of the person that's logged in and working. And in this particular case, it's just our IP address. So you see right here that root is the specific user. And then this is the overall system name, which is the IP-10.10.193, That's what this is right here, right? So you have the system, the operating system itself, then you have the user's information, and then you have the version of the system that you're running. So it's a 4.15, whatever, 204 generic, it's Ubuntu, this is the date, so on and so forth. So this is just the general information that you would need about the system that you're running, including the operating system itself, the user information, so on and so forth. Okay. Now the next one that we have is mount. So mount is going to show us our library file system, or technically our file system that's currently mounted. And when you look at this, it's a little bit crazy to kind of analyze, but anything that's after these colons right here, so this is the lib docker overlay, etc., and then after this one, so it's a little bit jumbled up together. I'm going to show you what it looks like on my system because it's a little bit more organized on my actual computer, and I'm currently running a Mac OS as I do this. So I'm going to show you what it looks like on a little bit more organized of a system. So this is what it looks like on my system, and you can see it's a little bit less busy. It's a little jumbled up together, muddled up together, and it kind of shows you like this is disk 3, S1, disk 3, S6, S2, so on and so forth. And these are the various volumes that are currently running, including the hardware, the data, and even my external drive that I have over here, right? So these are the various volumes. Volumes are essentially your hard memory drives, and there's the internal memory, the internal storage that's inside of your computer, and then there's external storage that's on the computer. So when you run mount, it'll show you the name of the various storage devices that are attached to your computer or included on your computer, and then you can connect to those by saying mount and then the name of the drive itself or the name of the storage, and it'll actually connect to that specific mounted device, right? Then we have who am I? So this will actually show the username. So this probably should have come like right after the uname user that we ran. But essentially you can do uname, right? So uname was the name of the system that we're on, which is Linux. And then who am I is the name of the user. And then remember when we did uname A, not X, excuse me, uname A, it showed all of this various information, but it doesn't include the specific who am I user, right? So uname A shows us this piece right here, which is this piece right here, and then it has the user, that's who am I, that's attached to that. So when you're trying to connect to this particular device, for example, and you want to connect through it through secure shell and you want to do SSH into this, you need to do something like SSH, and then you do root at the IP address, and it's not IP dot 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 dot, it's the actual IP address, which is this piece right here. So it would be username at 10.10.193.196, and then you would press enter, and then it would say, are you sure you want to connect? You say yes, and then it asks for the password of this particular device, and then you would SSH into this, assuming that you had all the right information, and it allowed for remote connections to come in like that. So that is how you find the specific username, is you just do something as simple as who am I, and it gives you the user's information. The next one that we got is ifconfig, and this is the information about the IP addresses that are currently connected to this particular device. And if you had a VPN that was connected, the VPN's IP address would show here as well, including the name of the system that's connected to it. And when you look at this, it doesn't seem very crazy because there aren't very many IP addresses that are connected to this. I'm not going to show you the one that's actually connected to my computer because the one on my computer is insane. But when we look at this, so you have the Docker, and then you have this guy right here, so the ENS5. And this is this specific IP address that is the IP address that's been assigned to our virtual machine right here. So when you want to find out, and there's a very similar command to this, it's called ipconfig, and you run that on Windows, and I'll just show you what that looks like on the Windows tutorial. But when you run ipconfig, there's very similar information that comes on a Windows machine, and it just shows you all the different IP addresses that may be connected to your specific device. And then so you have IPv6, and then you have IPv4. This is a very, very standard version of IPv4. So what you see, they're just separated by 3 dots, and they look like this. This is a iNet6, and you see it right here, iNet6, which is for an IPv6 version, which is much longer, more because there's so many more variations of IP addresses that can be generated like this. When you have this specific version of formatting for IP addresses, eventually you run out of the numbers of IP addresses that you can generate, and after a certain point, there were more devices that were created in the world than there could be potential IP addresses. That's why IPv6 came out, because there's more variations of IP addresses that can be created from a format like this. So when you want to know your own IP address, or if you're doing some pen testing exercises and you want to see the IP address of the machine that you're connected to, or anything like that, you would just run ifconfig. And then another cool information is that 127.0.0.1 is the local address. So this would be the local machine, and this thing applies to every single machine. So it doesn't matter what system you're running, and doesn't matter what version it is, none of that matters. When you do 127.0.0.1, that's the local machine. It's referring to the local machine. So if you wanted to go and connect to some kind of an instance for a server, for example, a Splunk server that you set up on your specific local machine, you could either do 127.0.0.1, or you could do localhost and then go to the specific port number that was assigned to it. And localhost, the words localhost as well as 127.0.0.1 both point to the same exact machine because it's being assigned to the local machine. So every single computer, every single machine has 127.0.0.1 attached to its local host identity, and that's how you know that it's very uniform. It's literally standard across all of the different machines. So there is that. And now the next few that we're going to go through are like super basic. So this is the date. So you just type in date and it shows you the current date and time that you're on. There's the uptime, meaning the amount of time that this machine has been on, and the specific load time that it takes, and it's been up this I think since that time, so not specifically this many hours, but it's been up since that time, and it's been up for this amount of time, and so on and so forth. That's the uptime, the amount of time that this thing's been up. And then the last thing that we're going to do on our basic command list is going to be the man command. So man stands for manual. And so if you do manual who am I, it'll show you the manual for the command who am I. And this is very basic. It's like a super basic command. So obviously there aren't too many attachments to it. But for example, let's do man nano. Nano is a text editor, and we're going to use it in a little bit. We're going to go over what it can do. These are all the different things that it can do for Nano. These are all the various options that you can run under Nano, and there's so many things that you can do with Nano. So if you ever wanted to know what you could do with a specific software that's installed on Linux, you can just do man and then the name of the software. One of the really important ones, or I mean some of the really important ones, for example, could be man John. John is a short, it's not included on this particular thing, but John is a short, the reference name for John the Ripper. So if you wanted to use John the Ripper and you didn't know what specific commands was available for John the Ripper, you would go inside of that manual, and then you would see all the different options that are available for John. So man is essentially the term that you would use to look at the manual for any of the other installments on a Linux machine. And just like that, we're kind of done with all of our super basic commands. We're still going to be going over a lot more basic commands, but those are like foundational commands to find out information about the system itself. And then now we're going to go into using some of these commands or some of the other basic commands to navigate the system. So right now we just learned about the system. So now what we want to do is we want to learn how to navigate the system. So let's go into those things. Okay, so now we're going to talk about system navigation, or they call it directory operations. But system navigation is you being able to navigate through the system. So this is that series of commands, and these are really important as well. So everything that you're learning right now, even though they may seem super basic, they're so important when you get into scripting and creating automations, because you're going to need to refer to all of these things later, right? So being able to do something like echo date, it literally just prints the date. But if I went and created, for example, a variable, so let's say we want to do the current date as our variable. So you would do current date equals, and then you do a $, and then you do the date command that we already covered, and you just press enter, and nothing happens because now inside of the CLI, inside of this particular session environment, I've created a variable called current date, and I want to echo this back to myself. And echo basically just prints whatever you got back onto the screen for you. So I want to go ahead and print this specific variable that we just created back to myself on the screen. I would just do that, and then now it gives me the date. Now you say, okay, well, why would you take an extra step when you could just do that and then it would give you the date? The specific reason for this is when you're creating a script for the Linux CLI using Bash, you can save a lot of these commands that we just talked about inside of a variable. So you can go ahead and change the, like for example, info will turn into, for example, right? It would be uname, I can't spell today, uname A would end up being that variable. And now I can say echo info, echo the variable info. You got to put that $. And then now it gives me all the information inside of this. So if I wanted to use this inside of a script, I could go ahead and save that entire command output, the entire command output here. I could save it inside of this little variable and then refer to that variable at any point inside of my script. And this is why these things are important. So they're super basic. These are basic commands that we're going through, but it's important to understand what they do, because later on when you get to scripting, you want to learn how to refer back to these things. So for example, let's go into some more system navigation types of commands that you can use for scripting later on, for example, right? So the one basic one is pwd, is print working directory, meaning in the current directory that you're in, you want to print that specific directory, the path to that directory, okay? Now, there's another one that it's actually falls under the basic navigation, which is called cd, right? So cd will change the directory into a specific directory, okay? So you say we list, ls stands for list, so ls is going to list everything that's inside our current directory. So for example, desktop is inside of our current directory, so I can do cd desktop, and now I'm inside of desktop. And if I do pwd, my path changes. So you see, originally I was in the root folder, now I'm inside the root desktop folder. And then let's say now we're going to do ls inside of the desktop folder, and it's going to show us everything inside of here. So that there's tools, so let's change directory to tools, and now my path has changed. So if I do print working directory, now my path again is different. It's a completely different path now. So these are the various ways to navigate and then find out where you are inside of a specific machine. So one of the greatest things that you can do when you log into a new machine, and we're just going to go over some of our commands that we've covered so far. So let's say you SSH into this machine and you've landed on this particular directory. For whatever reason, when you SSH into this machine, or you got like a web shell as you were doing your pen testing exercises, and the only way that you could get into this machine was to get into the tools directory, so on and so forth. So now you're inside of the machine. The first few commands that you would run is who am I, just so you can see what user you're running, and then pwd, print my working directory, to see where I am inside of the system. And then I would do, if I know that I'm inside of the root desktop tools directory, if I know I'm here, I know I got to go up 2 steps to get into the root directory to be able to get access to all the goods, right? So I can do cd, change directory, and here's a new thing. You do ... and it just takes you up 1 directory. And then if I do ... again, it takes me up another directory, and now I'm inside of the root folder. So I could do this, I could change to desktop tools, and I would end up in the desktop tools again. So just like I went up 2 directories, or actually I guess down technically, I went down 2 directories inside of the desktop tools folder, I can do the same thing to come up 2 directories. So I can do ... and it'll bring me back into my root directory. So this is how you change directories back and forth. And if you know the path of where you're trying to go, so for example, let's see what's inside of the desktop tools. We go to desktop tools and we see we have this other thing right here. So let's do cd peas, and then inside of this we also have lin peas, and now that's my full directory. So I'm going to do clear to clear the screen. That's also like a super basic command that I should have probably already covered that by now. But clears your screen. But now we can see my entire path already on the screen. But if I do print working directory, now I see that I'm inside of this long path right here, and I need to go up what? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. I got to go up 4 to land back inside of the root directory. So I do this, and now I'm back inside of the root directory. This is called path traversal. When you do this, you see, if you see this inside of any requests that are being made to a web server, when you're looking at logs and things like this, you can kind of anticipate that whoever hacked into your system was trying to traverse their path and get inside of one of the main directories that's very important, so that they can get access to some other things, so on and so forth. So if you just see this inside of your logs for any requests that are being made, you can guess and pretty much be sure that they're trying to traverse their path just so they can land inside of the root directory and ultimately inside of some other really sensitive directories. So this is called path traversal. We'll talk about this later. We're just talking about system navigation right now. So these are the basics of navigating the system, right? So you can do print working directory, you're looking at your current directory. You can do ls to see what's inside of your current directory, and then you can change your path by doing change directory, and you can go inside of one of the other directories. Again, you do ls and you can see what's inside of that, and change paths, so on and so forth. Now there is a way that you can also shortcut this. So if I do ls and then I look at the specific directories that exist inside of this without changing to desktop, so without doing cd desktop, I could do ls desktop and it will list what's inside of the desktop for me. And now we can kind of go a little bit further into some of these like kind of details of the ls command, because the ls command does like a lot of great things as well. So let's clear back the screen. So we see this, right? So if I do ls, I just see basically everything that's inside of the current directory. But what you don't see is that there's actually some hidden files and hidden options inside of this path. So what we want to do is we want to see everything. So you do lsa and it'll show you everything. Now you see there's a lot more stuff in here, and specifically a lot of the stuff that's hidden are the ones that are preceded by a dot. So these are some interesting things that's like, oh, we didn't even know this was here. And Burp Suite, for example, is a pen testing tool for web applications. And then so if I wanted to now see what's inside of that, I could do cd Burp Suite like this, or I could just do ls Burp Suite, right? So I could just do ls dot Burp Suite. And then here's a quick little tip. If you press tab, if you just click tab, if you've gotten the first portion of that specific word right, or that directory right, if you press tab, it'll just fill in the rest of it for you. So you do ls Burp Suite, press enter. Now it shows you everything that's inside of that specific hidden directory, which is again very, very useful. There's another version of ls, which is lsla. So instead of all, it's going to bring all of the attached parameters or attached options. We call it the long list format. So lowercase l is the long list format, and then lowercase a is all. So when you do lsla, it'll show you everything that's inside of this directory, but it also shows you the long list version, meaning it was created by root, it belongs to the root group, this was the date that it was created, this is the specific ID that's been attached to this, the 4096, all these things that you see right here. That's the specific ID, group ID that's been attached to this. And then this is really important, especially when you're pen testing. These are the permissions that are attached to each individual file or folder. So this first group is the groups of permissions, this first group of permissions, I should say. This first set of permissions belongs to the person who created it, okay? So we call this the user permissions, the owner permissions is what we call this. The second set is the group permissions. So whoever belongs to this group, or I'm like completely not even able to speak today. Whatever group this belongs to, so CTF builder, capture the flag builder, whatever group that belongs to, the group has executable and read permissions. And then you have this last bit, which is the person who is currently logged in. What type of permissions do they have? And for example, this is execute permissions. This one, you don't have any permissions. You can't do anything with this one, supposedly. I'm the root user, so it belongs to me. So I can do whatever I want with this because I have all of the root permissions attached to this. But if I wasn't root, if I was like John Smith or whatever, and I'm not a root user and I don't belong to the sudo users or the root users group, then I wouldn't have any permissions attached to this. I wouldn't be able to do anything with it. I wouldn't be able to read it. I can't obviously write to it. I wouldn't be able to execute it, any of that stuff. So these are the permissions that are attached to this, right? And the key important permissions are the WXR. W stands for write to, X stands for execute, and R stands for read. These are the most common permissions that you're going to see, especially when you get to the group levels and the user levels. Those are the most common permissions that you're going to see. And so if someone only has R permissions, that means they can read only. They can't do anything inside of that file or that directory. They can't write to it. They can't execute the file or directory, which means that it's, it's pretty much the lowest access form. I guess the lowest access form is that they wouldn't even be able to read it, but the second lowest access is that they only can read it. And this is really important because when you get into pen testing, one of the things that you are going to want to find is the permissions of each individual directory that you're in, and the permissions of each of the files that are available, and whether or not you can write to those files or you can execute those files. Because if you can write to those files, that means you can modify them and you can add certain, code to it to do certain things that you want, so on and so forth. So permissions are very, very important. This is not a permissions topic though. We're still talking about navigating files and directories, so I don't want to get ahead of myself. But that's how you can list all of the stuff inside of a directory, as well as the permissions that are attached to them, so on and so forth. There's another version of list called list R. So if I run list again, I see all of the stuff that's in here. If I do list capital R, this is called recursive, and this is gigantic. So obviously, recursive means it shows you everything that's inside of all of the individual folders that are in here. So this is gigantic because we're literally looking at the root folders, all of these specific directories that are in here, and there's a lot of stuff that's in here. So if we went to something that's a little bit smaller, maybe, so let's say cd_aoc, let's see what's in here. Okay, cool, great. So if I just this might be a little bit better. So if I do cd like this, and now we're inside of the pictures, and if I do list R, now it shows me everything that's inside of the pictures recursively, meaning it'll show me everything that's inside of the first level, which is what we saw already right here. So these things are exactly this. So this is all of that information, and it shows you, right? So dot stands for the current directory. So if I say, if I do this instead of the double, so if I do cd double, it'll take me back one. If I do cd pictures, it'll show me this again. Actually, probably a better example would be the ls command. So if I do ls dot, it'll show me everything inside of the previous directory because it's going back into the root folder, right? So, but if I do ls dot, it'll show me everything inside of my current folder. So the dot stands for your current folder. So if we look at this, the dot right here, and then there's a colon, it just says that inside of the root inside of the current directory that you're in, these are the output. This is all the stuff that exists in here. But if you do dot /aoc, which is this one other directory that we got, inside of this, there's also this other file right here. So it'll show you everything that's inside of your current directory, and then if there are any other folders, if there are any other directories inside of your current directory, it'll also show you what's inside of that. So in this particular example, inside the pictures, we have all of these specific things. So recursive means it shows you everything that's in your specific folder, as well as every other folder, and then the folders inside of that folder, so on and so forth. So it'll show you all of this stuff. So desktop was one that had like a few things in it. So we have tools and additional tools and all. So tools is probably better because tools has still a bunch of stuff in it. So if we go inside of tools and now we do lsr, you see all of the stuff that's in here, right? And so it shows us. So if we go back to the very, very top, let me see, can I even go back to the very top? I don't think I can. Can I? Am I? Where am I? Let's see where I am. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff. There's a bunch of stuff inside of the tools directory. So we still have not touched even, and it stops. I mean, like there's so many things in it that I couldn't even make it to the top because I ran out of space to go back to the top. So, but I think you get the idea, right? So it's like, it's the recursive list of things that it'll show you everything inside of your current directory, as well as all of the other following directories that are in there, and then the following directories that are in those, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. So that was it for that. So let's go back to our root, and now we're inside of the root directory again. Here's another thing for ls. You can do lowercase r, and it'll show you the reverse order of things. So if I do ls regular, you'll see that burp.json is the very first file. If I do lsr, you'll see that burp.json is the very last file. So r just reverses the order. Lowercase r reverses the order. You can do lst, lowercase t, and that'll show you the order of the last modifications. So it says which file in this entire directory was last modified, and in this particular case, it's our scripts file, the scripts folder, I should say. You can do ls and then do a capital S, and it'll go ahead and sort it by the size. So if I do ls s R, it'll reverse it and it'll sort by size, but it'll sort by the reverse order of size, right? So there's that. Let's clear. And now we got the long listing format and everything that we already did. If we do ls1, I believe, yeah. So if we do ls1, it's basically just kind of, I actually prefer this view because I like seeing things one per line. So if you just do ls1, it'll do one per line instead of doing it in kind of a, I guess, like a grid format. And if, especially if you're trying to see what was last modified or the size of things or the reverse order of things, it's easier to look at it one per line, because now when it reverses the order, you can actually see much more clearly what's happening. So let's do this one more time. So we do ls1, that's the normal order. If I do ls1 reversed, right? Or excuse me, not recursive. Now you see that it's actually been reversed, and it's much easier to see the reverse order of things. So burp.json was first here, and burp.json is last here. So I like the one per line view. It's actually, in my opinion, it's a much cleaner output. I really enjoy that a lot. And while we're here, I want to show you something that is, it kind of resembles the ls command, except it gives you much more of an output. So it's kind of similar to what we did with lsr, which was the recursive that will show you all of these things, but you kind of see that it's like it's a little bit tough to figure out what's what and what's going on. So let's clear this out. We'll go into our tools, or desktop is probably easier, right? And tools was inside the desktop. Or let me actually, I'll do this. So I'll go into pictures. That was a good one. Pictures, there we go. So we see that this is inside of the pictures directory, and then I could do lsr like this, and it'll give you recursive output, and then you'll see what's inside of the AOC and so on and so forth. So we see that there's something called tree. Tree will show you a tree version of everything. And again, it's just about the visual aspect of this to see how easily things can be read and found. And you can see like this, right? So this is our root, that dot right here at the top. It means that inside of where we are, there's something called AOC, which is a folder. And then there's these individual files. And then inside of the AOC folder, there is this one file. And it's just so much nicer. It's like such a nicer output of information and so much easier to read. So if let's go into a folder that's a little bit bigger. So maybe let's go Postman. What's inside of the Postman? There's files inside of the Postman, and then there's nothing else in there. So that's not good enough for us to find. So let's go back into desktop, because desktop does have a bunch of stuff in here. And if I do lsla, we'll see that we have all of these things. And so inside of additional tools, there's the opt folder. So maybe we can do additional tools, and then we'll do opt, and it says none. So that's annoying, because it literally just says that there's something called additional tools. Inside of that, we have, oh, that's probably what it is. So there's all these things inside of the additional tools. So that's probably too much information. So let's try it. I'm trying to find something that doesn't have too many things in it, so we can get a decent drop down. So I think word list is probably a really good one. Okay, so there you go. Word list is a pretty good one. So if we do tree for word lists, and it's still gigantic, obviously, as you can tell. If we do tree for word lists, it'll give us a tree view of everything that's inside of here. And it actually is a lot of data. I didn't realize how many word lists exist, and obviously we didn't get everything. But if I do lsla for the tree, or for the word list, you see that it has these various folders for word lists. And then if I do tree, maybe sec lists, maybe, could we do that? Yeah, so this should show me everything that's inside of sec lists. And then you see that it shows you everything inside of the folder, as well as what's inside of all of the other folders. You get the idea, right? That it basically shows you a tree breakdown, a tree version of this, and it makes it easier on the eyes when you're trying to analyze what's inside of all of those things. So this is, in my perspective, in my opinion, I like the tree version, especially if I know there aren't too many things inside of a directory and I just want to see the visual breakdown of how everything is collected and corrected. That's kind of what I prefer when I look at things instead of ls. If I do use ls, I always do lsla because I also want to see all of the hidden files, as well as the visual breakdown of their permissions and so on and so forth. At the very, very least, you can do ls1 just so you can see everything broken down vertically instead of horizontally in a grid format. And then that way you can kind of just manage the rest of it and view the rest of it. So that is essentially what we got for navigating. So going back and forth inside of folders and trying to find things inside of folders and trying to find things inside of directories and going back and forth between directories. So now the next thing that we want to do is how to read files or how to create new files, as well as creating new directories and deleting directories, so on and so forth. So let's go into that. It's a little bit more nuanced compared to directory operations. I would say it's kind of like managing. I guess operations technically could fall under, but whatever. You get what I'm talking about. So we were going through navigation. Oh, navigation. There you go. It's like it's different from navigation. It goes into operation. That's what I was trying to say. So everything that we've done so far falls under navigation because you're trying to navigate. And then now we want to go into operating and working with these files. So that is my the next piece that we're going to go through together. Okay, so now we want to talk about how to create files and folders and how to read files and folders and go through all of that good stuff right there. So first thing that we want to talk about is creating a folder, right, or a directory in this case. Make dir or make directory creates you a directory. So for example, we're just going to create a directory called dir, right? And so inside of our current folder, now we see that we have a directory called dir. Now if I go inside of that, there should be nothing in there, right? Because it's a blank directory. We just created this thing. Even if I do lsla, it should show me, oh my gosh, I messed that up. If I do lsla, it should show me nothing. It should literally show me this is the current path, so the dot stands for what we are on currently, and then if you do ... it'll take you back to the previous directory that you're in, and that's basically it, right? That's all you got. So there's nothing inside of our current directory. So what we can do is create a file. So the command to create a file is called touch. So touch file.txt. Now I've created a file called touch, or file, excuse me. Now I've created a file called file.txt. But if I want to see what's inside of this, so concatenate, cat stands for concatenate. And cat actually displays what's inside of this file onto the screen, but there's nothing inside of that file onto the screen. And there's a lot of different ways that we can put something inside of the file. One of the ways we already talked about, which is the echo command. So I can technically do this. I can just do echo file information onto the file.txt. And now if I do cat file.txt, we'll see that we have file information inside of that file. And remember earlier that we were talking about the information about our variables, right? So if I created a variable, this is where it gets interesting, right? So you create a variable which is called info, and that info variable is going to have the uname, a information, which is everything that's about that our specific machine inside of it, and we just create that variable. And now we can do echo info into file.txt, and if I go ahead and read file.txt, we'll see that we have all of that information inside of the file. Isn't that interesting? You'll also see that instead of adding the information on top of what was previously in there, it replaced all of that information. So this is also very important to understand. When you do something like this, you're not adding the information to it, you're replacing the information with whatever you're currently trying to do. So the next way to do this, the better way to do this, is by opening the file to write into it, and that would be using nano. Nano file.txt will then open the file, and now you can add stuff into it and then mess with it later. But we're going to talk about nano in a little bit. I don't want to jump ahead. So we're specifically talking about making files, removing files, copying files, so on and so forth. So we are currently inside of our sample directory, which is called dir, and there's a file in here called file.txt. I can create another directory in here and we'll call it dir2. And now we have two things inside of our test directory, which is dir2 and the file.txt. Okay, so now let's say for whatever reason I want to have multiple versions of this file, and I think it's very important to have a redundancy where, you know, I have a backup basically. Copy, so CP stands for copy. So I want to copy the file.txt file that I have inside of the dir2 folder, right? And I just do that. And now if I go inside of the dir2 folder, I have a version of the file.txt. So let's clear this out and let's go back one and let's do tree. And now we see that inside of our current directory, we have the directory dir2, we have a copy of file.txt, and then we have file.txt itself, right? So this is very, very important, right? That's what we have inside of this thing. Now I want to, for whatever reason, I want to change the name of this file, not even whatever reason, just because I don't want to get lost and I don't want to get confused, right? So what I'm going to do first and foremost, because I don't want to have duplicates, right? So I'm going to go into dir2 and I want to remove what I currently have in here because it's going to be confusing for me. Or I just want to rename this. So let's say you want to do that, right? So let's say you want to rename this particular thing. So you do file.txt. So MV stands for move, but it can also be used to rename something. So let's say I want to move file.txt to file2.txt. And now I do that. And now we see that it's changed the name of the current file that we had into file2.txt. But now let's say I actually want to move file2.txt. I actually want to move it from where it's currently sitting into our previous folder. So I just do one of these, the two dots and the /, and then we'll see that it no longer exists in the current directory that we're in because we just moved it. We moved it back one. So if I go back one and ls, now I see file 1, or you know, the original file, and file 2 are both inside of our home folder. So that's how you move something, right? So now file2.txt, I want to just move it back to the dir2 folder, and now we see that it's no longer here. And if we go into dir2, we'll see that it is inside of the dir2 folder, right? That is how you create a file. We created a file using touch. How you create a directory using make directory. We learned how to copy a file, which was the cp command. We learned how to remove a file or rename a file using the mv command. And we learned how to read what was inside of it using the basic concatenate or cat command. So right here, if I do cat file2, just to confirm that it had everything that was inside the original file, I can see that it actually does have everything inside of the original file. So I can confirm by just reading it onto the screen, or I can always just go into it using nano and see what's inside here. If I want to make sure that I can potentially add some other things to it or whatever, you can do that with nano. So we've done some of our basic file creations, reading of the file, directory creations, reading of the file, so on and so forth, right? But what if the file that you want to read is really big? So what if there's a lot of information inside of it? And this is a really good one because usually when you're looking at a log file, so let's see if we can go to the folder that holds the log files, which is usually, I believe, the log or the verilog directory. This is where all of our log files are. So you see, these are all log files. There's a bunch of stuff inside of these files. Okay, so this is not something that you can easily read by doing a simple cat command. So if I wanted to do cat auth log, for example, there's a lot of information, buddy. There's a lot of intel in here. And in this particular session that we're in, because the IP address for this machine is new, so on and so forth, it's not a lot. So this is the authentication file, and it just shows you who tried to access and who opened the session, closed the session, so on and so forth. So because for this specific IP address, it's a new IP, you know, for the length of this video is basically how long this IP address has been live, we don't see much information. But usually when you're looking at the authentication log for a computer for work, it's going to be a much larger file. So you'll need to display a certain number of information about this particular file. And this is where the head command is very, very useful. So if I do het auth log, then it'll show me the first 10 lines of this specific authentication file instead of showing me everything. If I do tail auth log, it'll show me the last 10 lines of this particular file. And if I wanted to just show like just a few lines of this whole thing, then I could actually say, show me X number of lines, right? And the way that we would do that would be this. I could do head, and I will do the auth log file, and then we can do n for number, and then we just do 5, and it shows me the top 5. And then same thing, right? Tail auth.log, and then do n5, and it'll show me the last 5. So you can show the number of lines that you want to see by doing the n parameter and then giving it an argument of whatever the number is that you want to see on the screen. So that's one of the ways that if you're dealing with a really large log file or just a large file in general, if you just want to see certain portions of it, you can go ahead and display it by using the head command or the tail command. And that's one of the simplest ways that you can just read something. Again, you can always do nano, and you can do nano.auth.log, and it'll show you the entire file, and then you can just go inside of this whole thing. And then once you're inside of it, you can use something like where is right here, which is the control W command, and you can search within this file for a specific string or for a specific value to see if you can find it, but we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. So that is the basic file operations of creating a log or creating a file and navigating with file, and creating a directory, navigating the directory, copying files, removing files, so on and so forth. So that would be our file operations. So now that we have done that, let's get a little bit more into the advanced stuff. And now we can kind of start combining a lot of these things and obviously integrating some new commands as well. But now you'll start seeing a lot of this stuff come together, and you'll be able to really get the power of navigating and operating inside of a Linux computer. Okay, now we want to find certain files. So a lot of times you won't know where something is, especially when you're doing capture the flag exercises or pen test exercise, or really just doing system administration in general, and you have to go find something inside of somebody's computer. They have a really messy computer and a messy desktop. You have no idea where they stored their information. There's a lot of different use cases for this particular command. So we have find, and then we have grep. So let's talk about find. Find, as the name implies, finds whatever you want inside of whatever directory that you imply. So for example, if I do find / and I just leave it at that, that means I want you to look at the entire computer, right? So again, going back to this, right? So if we do print working directory, and then we see find, or we see root, but you see there's a / in front of root. That means that in the current directory, so if I went up one more directory, now I'm inside of the overall computer, right? So now if I do an ls command, now we see a few other things than what we saw when we did the ls of root. So when you see ls of root, you see, oh, inside of the root user, there's the desktop and all these things that exist. But if we go inside of the root of the actual computer, there's a bunch of other things that kind of don't really make sense. And then inside of that, we have root as one of the users that exists, right? So the / is very different. And then you can also pay attention to this, right? So when we're inside of the actual root user, our command line has this little squiggly line. When we're inside of the root of the computer, the command line has a /. So that's also something else that we can pay attention to kind of notice how things change and where we are, right? So this is the big piece right here when you're going through find and using something like that. So let's say I'm actually inside of the root folder, and I can see that this is all here, but I want to do a search inside of the entire computer. So I can do find / and just leave it at that, right? So find / meaning find inside of the computer. Anything by the name, so this is how we search by the name of the file. And I want everything by the name of John. So previously I was trying to find John the Ripper, but I didn't know where it was. And now I just want to find John, okay? I'm going to run this as it is because I want to show you something, but then I'm going to show you the modified version of this command. That's actually the better version of this command. So we're going to do, I want you to find anything inside of this computer that has the name John in it. Just press enter, immediately it shows up. Then you see this thing right here. You see permission denied, and then we're probably gonna see different versions of this thing where the path is different, but then you're just gonna find actually, you know, this one was easy. So this one didn't have a lot of permission denied stuff. More often than not, when you want to find something, you'll get a lot of these permission denied things, and then it just kind of pollutes your results. You get so many permission denied lines that it's tough to sort through them and try to find what you want. So if I did the same exact command, and right now I just pressed up on the arrow keys and it brought the previous command that I ran, there's something called toDev null, which basically sends all of your permission denied stuff to this temporary folder dev null that it doesn't show you anything anymore. Oh, let me try to do that one more time. There we go. I just needed to put a / in front of it. So it ran the same thing, but except you'll notice that the permission denied result was no longer inside of the current results that we just saw right here. So we only actually see the actual results that we find, and now we're like, oh, okay, you know what, so there's the John folder for this. Oh, inside of my password attacks, this is the path of the John folder. So previously I wanted to see the manual for John. I wanted to see what I could do with John, and so now I can actually do that. So I can do man, and I can just paste the path of John over here, and it should show me what I can do with the John tool. Obviously now it says there's no manual entry for it, so maybe there is no manual entry for the John tool, which doesn't really make sense, but there should be a freaking manual entry for the John tool. So now I'm kind of obsessed with this, so I really want to see where I can find that. Okay, there you go. That seems to be a little bit more usable, but again, that's just it seems to be a lot of gibberish and a lot of garbage that just showed up for manual for this. So that's probably not the information that we're looking for. So let's see what else we can find. Okay, so that was not a good example, and I can't find the manual for John. So this is actually probably I'm kind of like, what is it? It's like when you put your foot in your mouth or something, like when you eat your own words, basically. That's kind of what it feels like in this moment. But I promise you there's a manual usually for a lot of these things that we can do. But that's not important right now. The important thing is find. Oh, you know what? Find. There you go. I know I can find a manual for find. So there you go. So man for find. This is what we get over here. These are all of the different options that we can run when we're doing find. And it'll show you things like, so for example, let's go and try to see that if we can find, actually instead of doing that, I'm just going to go search. I'm going to do find, and I'm going to do name, see if I can find anything by name. Okay, so here we go. Let me see. Seems to be that thing didn't show for whatever reason. I don't like that sometimes the find command inside of this search thing, it doesn't work the way that it should, because I know for a fact that there's something that we can do by name because we literally just did it. So there's iname, so like name. So see, name does exist. So maybe I was supposed to search for name with the dash in front of it. No, that doesn't show either. That's so annoying. Okay, well, whatever. Now we know that it doesn't work. There you go, name. It does exist. See, that's so annoying. Whatever. So this is what we have, name and then pattern, and then you can just go search by something by the name, and then you can do the name of the file and so many different versions of things. So let's do find, and then we're going to look again inside of our root directory. We want to search by the name, and I don't know, I'll do this. I'll do *.log because I want to find all of the logs, for example. And now I know that when I run this, there's going to be a lot of results, and it's going to keep going, and it's going to keep going. There are so many things, and there may be some lines right here that give me permission denied. It doesn't seem like it because I'm a root user, so I probably have access to a lot of these things, so I shouldn't be denied permission to any of this stuff. But you see that now I can find everything that has to do with log, right? So all of the logs I was able to find, which is pretty crazy, especially when you think about how many logs exist inside of a computer. So that's how you find something. That's basically it. So now we want to find something in our root folder that we're in. So root and then desktop. And then for this, I want to go find something by the name that has John in it, which I know that also exists. And then I'm going to press enter right here, and it automatically just shows me the only location that there's something called John inside of that. So this is how you find something, and this is very, very important to understand. So if I wanted to find something that has inside of the root folder and it goes by the name, I don't know, let's see what we can find. We'll do ATT and then we'll do asterisk on the front and the back of it. This will show me anything that has ATT inside of it. So asterisks is a wildcard character, and if you put asterisk in front of it as well as behind it, you're saying that anywhere inside of this name, as long as ATT exists, I want you to show me what is here. And it's literally so many freaking things, because battle, for example, has ATT in it. Unattended has ATT in it. So it'll show me anything that has ATT inside of it. And that's very important to understand, more for the concept, because the concept is what? You can put asterisk in front of something and you can put asterisk behind something, as long as you know what it is, and it'll kind of just give you that information. So I could do asterisk root and then do asterisk again, and it'll show me anything that has root. And obviously it's so many freaking things. So it could be root.crt, it could be fake root, it could be crypt root, it could be so many things. It could even show me the name of the directory that actually has root as one of my forward slashes, right? So home root, right? All of these things could show, because of the fact that this whole freaking thing is going to show me anything that has to do with root. And that's what find does for us, and it's very, very useful. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to use the command grep. Now this is what's really, really important, because this is actually a very useful little tool here. So let's use our find command, and we want to search inside of our entire machine for something that has the name of log in it, right? So we want to find basically a log file. And let's say inside of these log files, we have, you know, something right here called VMware network log. So in the VMware network log, I can either go inside of this directory, you know, cd into the var log, and then try to concatenate this, or I could just concatenate it, right? I could just do cat and then do var log VMware network log, and then now we see everything that's inside of this, and then there's a lot of information that's inside of this. But I can't, you know, I don't want to visually search through all of this information. I want to find something inside of this. So the one way that I would do this, and let's see if this actually works, because I can't remember the order of which that I could do this. So if I just do grep by just searching through this inside the entire thing, and then go look for my string. So for example, active. Yeah, so I don't think it works like this manually. So I think we actually have to first list what's inside of it. So by doing concatenate inside of it, and then pipe the results of this into our grep command. So this is what's a useful little tool as well. So when you use pipe, this thing that you see right here, let me center this. When you use this pipe symbol, you're taking the output of this, which is all of this stuff that you just saw right here. This is all the output of this command. And you're taking the output of this whole thing, and you're going to use it as an input for the grep command. So you're saying, hey, listen, I want you to read the whole thing, and then I want you to search through this. So grep does searching for me. So I want you to search through this and search for the word active inside of it. And now you see it only brings me the lines that actually have the word active in it. So for example, we see right here, one of the things that we had was ENS33 is already active, and boom, it actually shows me ENS33 is already active, right? So this is actually super useful. Believe it or not, this is very, very useful, and it's super quick. That's the thing that I really love about the combined force of using concatenate and grep together, because you can search through a massive log file for certain keywords or users or whatever it is, and it'll bring it onto the screen real quick. And what's nice is it also highlights the word that you were looking for, so you can just see what line it's on. And it's just, I mean, it's really, really freaking useful. And I think there's actually even a command, don't quote me on it, but let's see. It's actually the n command. So it's not the l command, it's the n command, or the n parameter, excuse me. The n parameter will show me what line of the file it found this specific thing, right? So this is probably one of the things that you want to always use with grep, is the n command, or not command, parameter or option. The n option will show you what line of the file it found this particular result in. So ENS33 is already active, is found on line 90. And that's very, very useful if you have a giant freaking file that has thousands of lines and you want to find that specific item and you don't know what line it's on, so on and so forth. This will make it extremely, extremely easy for you, and it's quick, right? So if you just know what word or string or phrase you're looking for, and then you go ahead and do that. So let's say that we want to do the same exact thing, and instead of doing active, we want to do a string, a combined string. So we do already active is the thing that we want to search for. Obviously, our results are going to be much smaller because active was included in a few other results as well. But there's only 2 results that give us already active as our specific search phrase. And now it's shown us what line they're on as well. 90 and 91 show these 2 phrases, so on and so forth. So grep combined with concatenate is amazing. It's one of my favorite tools. And I think it's like super, super freaking useful for you as well. So you can definitely use it. And it has a lot of other options as well. So if I go and try to show you all of the grep command options, you'll see that it can do a bunch of things, right? So generic program information, so grep version, output the version number of the grep and exit. So that's specific to the actual command itself. If you want to look through the specific pattern controls or matching controls, you can say E pattern, which would be a regex pattern, using pattern as the pattern itself instead of using a specific phrase or string. If you know anything about regex, I already made a video on regex, and if you haven't seen it, go check that out because it's very, very useful. Regex applies to a lot of different things, so you can use it by even inside of the grep command. So you can grep the file itself. That's what it was. So instead of using concatenate, you could actually use that. See, I just learned something myself. So instead of doing this command, right? Instead of doing cat whatever, you could actually do grep and then do the file name. That's what I was missing last time. So file name needs to be here, and then you can search for the string inside of it. No such file or directory, so let's do grep, and then I think it was F was what I was supposed to do. So you could have used the file option to actually go specifically search from a file instead of using concatenate. You could go count. So this is another really useful one where it's like how many times do you see a specific term. So it says it suppresses the normal output, meaning it won't show you the actual output where it shows the lines and where it found the text. It'll just count the number of times that something shows, and then it'll just give you that count number. Then L files without a match, L files with matches, so on and so forth. So let's use the count one because count I think is a really, really useful one as well. Another useful version of a search command is actually locate, and this is a much quicker version of find because it just does a quick search of the system index. So it just basically looks through the index. So if I just did locate John, it'll do all the searches of John inside of everything in the system. Previously we had to declare where we wanted John to be, and there were different things that we had to include in it. For example, the search location, the search name, all of these other things, and that's what we had to do for find. For locate, you literally just do locate and then the term that you're looking for, and it'll pull up everything that has that name potentially in it or that term potentially in it. And it could also work with something like this where you do locate.log and it'll show you all the .log information and everything prior to that. So it's a much quicker version of find, and a lot of times I would lead with this. Actually, I wouldn't start with find. I guess in the tutorial I kind of just went with find first, but I would lead with locate first, and then if you can't find it using locate, then you start doing something specific where you do find inside of the root folder, desktop, yada yada yada, and then you go through the rest of the command using find. Find is more of a specific search, I would say. And it has a lot of different parameters. Like you can search instead of by name, you can search by the user. So for example, if I did find inside of the root by user root, it would show me everything that belongs to root or has the name root associated with it. And you can see obviously there's so many things, and we're going to do Control C to end the running process. Control C is actually one of those kind of gimmies. I should have probably mentioned this also at the very beginning, but if you want to cancel a command as it's running, it would be Control C, especially a command that's as giant as the one that we just ran, because the user root has so many things that belong to it, and it's just, it'll probably bring up everything inside of this system, because everything inside of this system belongs to the user root. So that's the other thing where you can kind of go ahead and try to find information using the find command and an individual user. And then what's interesting is that the find command does a lot of really useful things, especially when you're going for searching by user or by searching for the other parameters inside of find. So for example, we can do find, let me make sure I'm actually in here. We can do find, and then we can go by the parameter of minimum, minute minimum, and then it goes you essentially shows you the files that were modified less than a certain number of minutes ago. So for example, I can do find this and then do min, so minute minimum, and then we can do, I don't know, 10, and it'll search through everything to see if we can find everything. And then you see how it gives us the permission denied stuff, and then if anything, it might give us something else that we can view as it searches. So it's still going, and then interestingly enough, it says there's no such file or directory, but it actually gives you the path to the individual file or the directory. But specifically for this command that we just ran, it showed us basically all the files that in the last 10 minutes have been modified or updated in some capacity, right? And then you can, I believe there's even a version of this where you can do an hour minimum. So let me just make sure. Okay, so there is no hour minimum. I think you would just have to extrapolate and go, instead of like 1 hour, you would probably do 60 minutes or 120 minutes, so on and so forth. That I could be wrong. If you want to go do some extra research and update me in the comment section, please go ahead and do so. I would love to get more results from this. And I mean, you can always go check with Gemini or any of the AIs or the chatbots, and it'll help you with those parameters and those options as well. So that is a very useful portion of find. And then there's something that we can do if we just kind of go back a little bit. So we had the user parameter, and then we ran and searched for everything for user. But let's say you don't want to look for everything that belongs to user, but let's say you want to see all the different users to try to find something for individual users. How do you find the names of the users? And then how do you add users? That's kind of like a great segue to getting to the other more, I would say definitely not beginner commands that exist inside of this thing. So how do you add users? How do you find people with certain permissions, right? How do I find data with certain permissions? How do I find files that belong to certain people, so on and so forth? That's a really good segue to kind of get into permissions, and then changing permissions, and of course creating and modifying users. The first thing that we want to do is we want to find where all of our users are stored. And there's something called the etc password file, and it's PASSWD. And inside of this, unlike the names, because the name kind of implies that there's passwords in there, but there's no passwords in there. It's just the users that are in there. So we can just do our cat command and do etc password, and it lists all of the users that exist on this particular machine, right? And so it's basically the first series of characters here. So Pulse is a user, XRDP, SSHD, Ubuntu is a user, Postgres, StatD, so on and so forth. And then when you go to the top of this document, there's always, at the very top of the document, is going to be the root user, then the daemon user, the binary system, so on and so forth. So the main user at the very beginning of every single etc password file is going to be the root user. But then we have all of these other users as well. So if we wanted to go and find something that belonged to a specific user, we can go ahead and do it this way. So previously we ran find by the user, but I can go in this case and do find by Ubuntu, for example. The user is Ubuntu, and it still gives me a bunch of data, because obviously Ubuntu is probably going to have a bunch of stuff as well. or you can just do find by literally any other username as well. So that's another way that you can find something. Then you can go, and this is where we're kind of leaning into more of the pen testing cybersecurity stuff, but I feel like it's worth it to just teach you this as well. You can find things by permissions. So earlier when we were going through analyzing the various permissions of files and everything, and we were looking for things that we could write to, or we were looking for things that we could execute. Those are really, really important, especially when you're going through pen testing and things like that. So one of the great ways to do that is by searching for the permission option. So again, find inside of the entire machine for permissions, okay? And then I can just do permission X like this. You can also do the permission by the permission number. So 755 could be a potential permission parameter, or potential permission number, for example. And it gives you, I think 755 gives you write permissions, because it has all of the permissions. So it's 755 read is digit of 4, write would be a digit of 2, and execute would be a digit of 1. So if it has 7 as the entirety, that means there is read, write, and executable permissions, and that belongs to the original person. So if we just run this real quick, and let's go, this is a giant result that we're gonna get, so we're gonna stop this real quick. Okay, I have to rerun that one more time. So let's say, for example, Windows. So everything inside of the Windows, we have web apps inside of Windows, and we have all these other things inside of the web apps folder, and then we have exploits, and inside of exploits, there's all these different things. So let's say that we want to see the permissions of the stuff that's inside of the exploits directory, for example. So we're going to copy this, and then we're going to do lsla, and then we'll just paste that thing, and hopefully it won't be too large of a result. And then we get all this stuff, right? So these are all the things that are inside of the specific directory of Windows, or Windows exploits, search exploit exploits, my bad. So inside of the search exploit exploits directory, we have all of these various things, for example, Android exploits and Athos exploits, so on and so forth. And then attached to all of these are our permissions right here, right? So you want to just confirm and make sure that these are the executable, readable, writable permissions, right? So we have 755 was the original number that was attached to it, and so 7 represents the initial creator. So obviously the creator has read permissions, which is 4, write permissions, which is 2, and 1, which is executable, so that would be a 7 value. The group only has execute and read permissions, right? So that would give us read is 4, execute is 1, so that's 5. And then the specific user that's running this as well only gets executable permissions, so it's 1. So I don't really know how that actually plays out. I think it calculates this specifically, but for me personally, I don't like searching by the number because it gets a little bit confusing for me. I'm not that smart when it comes down to these things. So what I like doing is I like searching by the actual letter that's been assigned to it. So for example, instead of searching by permission of 755, I could just search by the permission of executable. So I could just say find inside of this anything that has the execute permission, like that. And then X in this particular case, I guess, isn't working. So let's try, maybe it's X like this, and that doesn't work either. Okay, so actually the syntax is like this. So you do find and then perm, and then we gotta just make sure that we assign something to it. So for example, the user, we want the user to be able to execute, and then it shows us all of the files that can be executed by the user. And then we're just gonna do Control-C to stop that from running. So you can search that way. So it would be find this, and then you can even do this where you can do type F. So for example, the type would be a file, type D would be a directory. So if I want to find all the directories that have the permission for the user to be able to execute, and then it'll show me all the directories that have the permission from the user to be able to execute, right? So this is how you find things by permissions to be able to run them. It goes more into pen testing and more so about ethical hacking than system administration, but it's also useful to be able to find these things as well. And you can again find by the user themselves, and actually go and say find this by user root, and then you can do perm would be execute, for example, or maybe not that way. I think it would be perm would still have to have the user execute, and then there you go. That's what it shows. So it shows all the stuff that belongs to the root user or any particular user that has the executable permission attached to it, and then you would be able to find whatever those files are, and then you can continue your investigation or your administration that way. Then this is like the perfect segue to now go into changing permissions as well as creating users and modifying users. So this would be now a new level of education. Now we can definitely just kind of move on from find and searching and things like that, and now we can go into users and permissions. Okay, so the first thing before we get into provisioning new users is that we need to understand what chmod is, or change mode essentially is what that stands for, and that's the permissions command. So you can add or remove permissions to any file or directory using that. So if I go in here and I look at all the stuff that's inside of my root directory, and I see there's a bunch of things that are here, and let's say we want to see, we'll just do LSL just to kind of keep the list short. And we see that our desktop has executable. We have all these different directories that have it. The burp.json has read, but it doesn't seem to have executable permissions. So let's see if we can give permissions plus X to the burp.json file. And let's see if that actually worked. And now we can execute it. So previously we couldn't. So let's see if I can scroll up a little bit. So burp.json previously didn't have any executable permissions attached to it. And then I just did chmod plus X, meaning execute, to burp.json, and it gave it to the burp.json. And now it actually has the executable permission attached to it. And now let's say I want to remove it. So chmod minus X, and then same thing, burp.json. And now I can do LSL, and then now we see that burp.json does not have executable permissions attached to it anymore. It's that simple. You could literally add or remove any permissions to any file or folder using the change mode command. And then you can do multiple additions. So we could do multiple, we could do X and what is it? X and W in this particular case, and then add it to burp.json, and then do LSL. And now we see that it has the X attached to it. I think execute kind of encompasses writing, so you can just also write to it if you can have execution permissions to it. Execution sounds really bad. But again, we could also just do minus XW and then burp.json, and then list it, and then now it removes it. So it's that simple. It really is not. It's a fairly easy command to wrap your head around, but it's also a really important command, especially again when it comes down to ethical hacking, pen testing. But specifically for system administration, this is a really big one. Change mode removes permissions from certain things, right? So you can give permissions to people, or you can remove permissions from people. And that's one of the big things that you would do as a system administrator, is that certain files or certain folders or certain programs should have temporary permissions, and then you have to remove the permissions for that person as their job is done and they move to a different department or whatever it is. So permissions are a really big deal when we're talking about system administration. This is one of the big things. Like, there's a part of system administration that requires that you find things and move things and create things, but the big part of system administration comes down to managing users and creating users and removing users, modifying users. All of that stuff is really important, but then it's giving them permissions and removing permissions from them that becomes a really big deal when it comes down to system administration and becoming a really good SysAdmin. So that's one of those things that is going to come up a lot. So you need to know how to do permission changes. So chmod ends up becoming one of those tools that you're going to end up using very, very frequently as you add users and as you remove users, add groups and remove groups, so on and so forth. Which actually reminds me of giving specific permissions to specific types of people. So for example, if we just use this command by itself, typically it defaults to giving permissions to the user. but let's say you want to give permissions to the group as well. So you would do G for group, and then you would do plus X, and then you would do the file name. And then in that situation, ideally, it would give executable permissions to the group itself, right? So instead of adding X to the very last piece, which is the user, it added X to the group, which is this piece right here, right? So that is what we could do in that regard. And again, we could do G minus X to remove that execute permission from the burp JSON file. And then now we can go and verify that. And now we can see that it removed it from the group level. So if you want to add it to the group instead of adding it to the user, you would need to precede it with that. Or if you just want to specifically add it to the user, then it would be chmod u plus x burp.json like that. And then you can do LSL to confirm, and then you see that that exists over there as well. So this is the user level right here that you see right here. So this is how you make sure that you add it or remove it to specific groups or specific, and I just got to make sure that I do this because I don't want to accidentally mess anything up here. And then we do that, and then we see that the permission has been removed because the user was root, which is the current user that we're logged in. So if we want to give ourselves permission or remove permission from ourselves, we would do that, and then that's how that works. So change mode, chmod, very, very important command, and it's very important to understand what it actually does. And it doesn't assign permissions to, or it doesn't add somebody directly to the access control list, the ACL, but it just changes file permissions. So that's something that you just need to understand. We're not, by doing this, we're not adding a person to a specific access control list. You would need to use the user modification commands for that. All we're doing in this particular case is we're just adding or removing permissions from files and folders, and that's the big thing to understand. So that is it for chmod. So let's now move to the new user adds or user provisioning portion of this. Okay, user provisioning. This is another really big responsibility for a system administrator. So this is what we will, I think this will end up being kind of like the biggest portion of this. The change permissions one was like a really big one, but I think this is probably one of the biggest things that you're going to end up doing, especially as you become a specific Linux administrator. And you can do this by, I've actually created a script for user provisioning that is available to all of our members from Hackaholics Anonymous, and that specific script does a lot of this for you by just running the script, because this is one of those things that when you become a system administrator, you're gonna have to create a bunch of the users all the time. You're gonna have to delete users, and it becomes like a really big repetitive process that you have to do all the time. And so this is going to be one of those specific steps that it would just be very useful if you had a script for it. But once you kind of study scripting, it's not hard really to create a script for something like this. It just needs to make sure that you actually do it really, really well, which is why I just made it for our members, and you get access to it. It's just one of the extra perks that you get on top of all the different perks that you get. That's just one of the perks that you would get at the very beginning as well. It's actually one of the first sets of scripts that I end up giving to people, because it just makes your life so much easier as you become a system administrator to have a script that does your user provisioning for you. But anyways, here is the first command here. The first command is the user add command. So you want to add a user, right? More often than not, if you're not a and even if you are a root user, you will probably have to do a sudo preceding the user add command, because sudo is it specifies that you definitely know what you're doing and you actually have the permission to do what you're doing. Adding users and modifying users is something that is only reserved for administrators and root users and people who actually have domain admin permissions and all of that stuff. So you need to do this as a sudo user, and you have to just precede your command with sudo. So let me see if I can just do it by this. So user add will do John Smith. Oh, I guess I can do it because I am a root user, right? So if I do this again, so if I do this, I am root. So technically, I can actually do that. So now I'm good. But if I wasn't root and I was just a person that was added to the sudo list of people that actually had root permissions, I would have to proceed it with doing sudo. So if I want to just make sure that this person exists, right, who my current list of users are, right? Let's see if we can verify if John Smith has now been created. And there he is. So we just checked our Etsy password list and we see that John Smith was the newest user that was added, and now this is his home. He actually has a home folder, and then this is his direction, his path to his bash shell, his the directory that accesses shell for John Smith. So very good. So now John Smith is now one of our users. Great. So let's say we want to set up a password for John Smith. So what would we do for this? So this is actually the list of all the commands that you have for the password command. So PASSWD. This is the list of all the commands that are available for that. And you can see over here that you can obviously just check the status on all the accounts for their passwords. You can delete the password for somebody. You can force the expiration for the password on somebody. You can gain help. Obviously, you can keep tokens and activate something. So set password inactive after expiration to inactive. You can lock somebody's account. So you can, this is also a very big deal when you're creating scripts. So you say, somebody attempts to log in 3 times, I want their password to be locked, right? Check the status for something, unlock somebody's password, all of that stuff. After a maximum number of days, we want the password to change and we want it to force being expired, so on and so forth. This is where that specific command comes in when you're trying to create scripts to provision, not just provision, but administer and modify, manage users. So in this case, we want to add a password for our John Smith user. So we're going to do password John Smith, and then it's going to say enter the new Unix password, and I'm going to do Superman with a exclamation and a capital S, exclamation capital S, and password for John Smith has been updated successfully. So there you go. Now we got John Smith's password, and we just set that John Smith's temporary password, and now when they log in, they can go ahead and use that password, and then they can manage it as such. We can set it so that their password forces them to reset their password upon logging in. Now, the way that we would do this is that actually once we create their password, we literally just set the flag that we want their password to expire. So that's basically it. So it's like you do this and it says that the password expire information has changed, meaning that their password has technically expired. So that as soon as you set up the new user, you can set up their password, obviously, and then as soon as they log in, because this is assuming that it's a new user and they haven't logged in yet, so as soon as they log in, they're going to be like, hey, your password's been expired, you need to set a new password, and they go ahead and create their new password in that regard. And now they have their own password and nobody else knows their password, right? And that's basically the way that kind of like the workflow of how this whole thing works. And so now I have this guy, we forced him to do this thing or to set up this password, and something has happened, and now for whatever reason he's no longer at the company, or he did his job because he was like a temporary person that came and worked, and now we just want to make sure that we delete this person. So this is like one of those things that again just becomes very, very, very quick, right? Like really easy. And that would be del user. So delete user John Smith. And there you go. And removing user, group John Smith has no more members. Oh, that's actually a really important thing as well. So because John Smith was created and he wasn't automatically added to any groups, Linux just creates a group for John Smith, right? And so John Smith now belongs to the John Smith group. But we just deleted him. And what happened is that we removed the user, but now it says warning, the group John Smith has no more members, meaning the group itself still exists. So one of the things that you want to do is you want to delete the group too. So you want to do group delete and then John Smith. And then now you delete the group itself. So group John Smith does not exist anymore. There you go. So that is one of the great things that you can do to just make sure that you've covered all of your bases. And this is also something that, again, that just happens in scripting. When you create a new script and you want to create a script for deleting a user, you just make sure that whatever group that person belongs to also gets deleted. If it was like a temporary group that was created, if you added him to a different group, then you don't want to delete the overall group, because there's probably other users that belong to that group. Does that make sense? So one of the things that we can do, and we'll just re-add John Smith this time around, and then we'll use a new new command to kind of make this thing a little bit easier. This is probably what you want to do temporarily, right? Like, so or not temporarily, you just kind of want to do this from the very beginning. So you do user add, we'll add Jane Smith this time. So we'll add Jane Smith, and then what we're going to do is for the password, we're going to create Superman1 for the password. So we added a new user, Jane Smith, with a temporary password, Superman, and now we have that password and that user. So if we went back to our Etsy password file, we should now be able to see a Jane Smith, and we do see a Jane Smith at the bottom of our file. So now we know that we have Jane Smith inside of our group. So now what we want to do, since we know that Jane Smith was added to their own temporary group for Jane Smith, we want to just make sure that we add Jane Smith to any specific group, for example. So whatever group that we want to be able to add them to, we want to just transfer them to that group. And let's say, for the sake of argument, because I don't want to modify anything inside of this particular machine that I'm in, so I'm going to create a group. And the way that I would do this, you guessed it, is by doing group add. Very similar to user add. So I'm going to create a group, and then we're going to call this group marketing, right? So group add is now marketing, and now we want to add Jane to that group, right? We want to transfer Jane Smith to that group. The way that we would do this is that we would go ahead and modify the user. So there's called user mod. Previously we had user add, now we have user mod. And now we want to add, so you would do -A and then capital G. So you're adding it to the group marketing, and then the person that we're adding is Jane Smith, like that. And so now we've actually added Jane Smith to the marketing group. Now, if we want to see what group Jane actually belongs in, just to confirm that we did add her to the right group, so we would do groups, and that's the very simple command, groups, and then we now are looking for Jane Smith. And then it says Jane Smith belongs to marketing. Look, and of course the original Jane Smith group as well. So now I want to see if I can potentially delete the group Jane Smith, right? I just want her to only belong to the marketing group. I don't want her to belong to any of the other groups. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the group del, and then I'm going to delete Jane Smith. And okay, so now we learned that we can't remove the primary group of user Jane Smith, because that was the group that was created for Jane Smith when we provisioned her, and that's the primary group that she belongs in. So it's all good. So now we can make sure that that stays, or we can try to modify her primary group. So let's see if we can do that. And the way that we can do that is by using the user mod option again. Now if we do a lowercase g, we're referring to the primary group of this person. So we want to add this person or change this person's primary group. So in this particular case, it would be the marketing group, and we want to change Jane Smith's primary group. So user mod, the primary group would be lowercase g marketing, and we do Jane Smith, and now they're changed. So if I run groups Jane Smith one more time, I should see that Jane Smith only belongs to the group marketing. And you will notice that automatically the previous group, her previous primary group, which was Jane Smith, has now been deleted, right? So this was her previous grouping, and now this is her new grouping, right? And so this is now their primary group for Jane Smith, right? So now what I'm going to do now, I'm going to add another user to the marketing group, and then I want to show you how to find all of the users listed inside of a certain group. Okay, so I added a new user, and we can now see our new user, which is John Doe. So we had Jane Smith, and now we have John Doe. And now we want to see, and I also obviously just added John Doe to the same group, which is our marketing group, because now we have 2 people inside of marketing because our company is expanding. So what we want to see now is we want to see how many people are listed inside of the marketing group, or essentially how many people are listed inside of any group, right? So we would do this by get ENT, which is get entries, essentially. That's what that stands for. So get ENT and then group and then marketing. And so it says, oh, marketing is Jane Smith. Oh, you know what? Interestingly enough, John Doe is not added to this thing. So I'm very curious to now see why John Doe was not added to my group. So I'm going to do groups and I'm going to do John Doe. And let me see here. I have John Doe in marketing, but I don't see what the various users are inside of my marketing group. So there's something off here, right? There's something interesting here. So if I do groups Jane Smith, she's also in marketing. So I know I have 2 people inside of the marketing group, but for some reason when I do get ENT group marketing, I don't see everything. So let's see what's going on here. Okay, there we go. So our first command, for whatever reason, the user modification command didn't work and we weren't able to add John Doe to the marketing group. So we are now introducing a new command just in case the user mod command fails, which is the G password. So group password, I think that's what that stands for. But G password and then A for adding, and then John Doe is the user, and then we're adding them to the marketing group. And then we got a notification that we're adding John Doe to the group marketing. And then when I ran the command to see the contents or the entries inside of the group marketing, we see now we have Jane Smith and John Doe inside of the group marketing. So that's how we were able to find whether or not our person was actually added to the group that they belong to. So now, since we've done all this, we got to clean up. So I've modified these things inside of this temporary machine, and I just want to make sure that I don't leave anything behind, and I don't kind of leave these things without doing proper cleanup. So we're going to go ahead and do a user delete. So delete user, and we want to delete the user John Doe, and they've been deleted because it's the primary group of so group John Doe not removed because it is not the primary user of John Doe. So that's done. So now what we want to do is we want to delete the group John Doe. And so that should be now completely done because we didn't get notified previously before that there was nothing that existed. So that's all good. And then the next thing that we want to do is we want to delete Jane Smith. And we should get the same thing, group Jane Smith not removed because it's not the primary group of user Jane Smith. So what we're going to do is we're going to group delete Jane Smith to make sure that we delete that group as well. So that should be all good. And now we want to make sure that we delete our group itself that we created, which is the marketing group. And there we go. Now we've deleted the marketing group as well. So how do we check to see if all of these things are good, right? How do we check to see if everything that we just did actually worked? So first and foremost, we're going to check the password etc file to see if our users are gone. And lo and behold, we no longer have Jane Smith or John Doe in our users file. And the next thing that we want to do is we want to check our groups to see if the group itself has been deleted. To be able to check to see if a group has been indeed deleted, we can check a few different things. So first and foremost, we can just do a cat of the etc group list, and we can pipe that since we just learned what that is, and we can grep marketing from that output to see if there's anything exists that it actually doesn't. So if I went and checked inside of the cat etc group itself, I'll be able to see these are all the different groups that I got, and it's a long list of stuff, so I don't want to manually search through that. That's why we did our grep command to see if marketing exists. And indeed, marketing does not exist. There's another way that you can do it, which is just doing the get entries of the group marketing. And if you do that, if it existed, if there was an actual group named marketing, it would show us the contents of that, but it doesn't because we actually verified that it has been deleted, so we were able to delete our group. And this is one of the ways that you can just make sure that all that stuff was gone. And so here's how we're going to combine all of these things to be able to add that user to a certain group, and then modify the permissions of that user by modifying the permissions of a group, right? So this is how it gets. This is like a full process of what you're going to end up doing when you get hired as a system administrator somewhere. All right, so starting from the top, we're going to use the user add command, and we're going to add another person. In this particular case, we'll do Hank H. That's going to be our new user. And I actually need to now modify my password because I forgot to modify my password. So user mod P for password, right? I think that's basically what it was. Nope. Let's see what the actual command is going to be. Yeah, my bad. So it's not a user mod command. It's actually the password command. So we're going to do password command, and then we're going to do Hank H. And then now it's going to say set their unique password. And so it's going to be, I'm just going to do password, which is a very weak password, but whatever. So now we have our password updated. And so now, since we have a temporary password assigned to this person, what we want to do is we want to force them to change their password on their next login. To verify how to actually change somebody's password, like force them to change their password, we would just go through all of these things. And so it says delete a user's password or make it empty. This is a quick way to disable a password for an account. It will set the name account passwordless. That's not what we want to do. We want to expire it. So immediately expire an account password. This in effect can force can force a user to change their password at the user's next login. So that's what we want to do, is we want to expire the password for the new user that we just created. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do password, and then we're going to do E, and then we're going to do Hank H's password. So their information has now changed, and now they're forced to change their password on their next login. Okay, so great. So now we have a new user named Hank H, and Hank H has their password expired, so that on their next login, they're going to be forced to change their password. That's great. So now the next thing that we want to do is we want to add Hank H to a new group, right? So that's the piece that we need to make sure Hank actually has a new group that they're working from. So we're going to create a new group, and we're going to do group add with that thing. And group add, we're going to have, we'll just do tech as like our new group. So group add is going to be tech. And so now we have a new group, and we want to make sure that our new user is now inside of that group. So we can do user mod AG, because this was the original user command that we used. So hopefully this will actually work. And then we'll do Hank H, see if Hank H has now been added to the tech group. So we need to actually verify that Hank H has actually been added to the tech group. And we would do that by running the get ent, so get entries group tech. See, there he is. So Hank H is actually inside of that group. So perfect. So now we created our user, we modified their password, we expired their password so they can reset it. We created a new group, and now we added Hank H to that group. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to modify the permissions of that group, right? So we want to give Hank a specific set of permissions. And those specific permissions could be anything, just depends on the specific environment that you're running and what type of permissions that person should have. So we can do something, obviously you already know what the command is. So it would be a chmod command, and we're giving the permissions to a group. So we want to give read and write permissions to the group tech. It didn't work because we're actually not inside of our groups directory. So that's probably one of the big things that we gotta make sure that we do. And this is something that, you know, I'm kind of being reminded of all of these things as I go through this. So I need to first be inside of the groups directory to actually see all of the groups that we got. So we're gonna go into our groups directory. So cd etc group, and okay, so it's not even here. So let's see if we can find it. And we do indeed actually have a location called etc group, so there might be a reason why I can't go in there. So let me see if I can manually go in there. So I'm inside of the etc location, and inside of here I definitely do see that there's something called group here, but it's not something that I can mess with. So if I ran lsl here and we went over here, we would now be able to see that in this particular location, specifically the groups directory. So let's go look at this real quick. Or actually, it might not be even a directory. I think the groups directory is actually a file. So we can verify this right now as we go to check this, because I think it's not a directory. Yeah, it's a file. So this is actually not even a directory. So this is a file. So the one thing that we got to make sure is that we got to be in the particular location to be able to change the permissions of that group. So that's the one thing that we got to make sure that we can do. Now, unfortunately, in this particular case, it seems to be that since this is not a directory that we're using, we need to just make sure that the permissions for that are going to actually work. So let's see what we can do to bypass this. Okay, so I actually may have skipped a step, it seems like. So the thing that we have to do, because we're in a Linux environment, I was kind of thinking like we were in a Windows environment, because in Windows you can actually change the permissions assigned to a specific group, and then you literally just drag and drop somebody inside of that group, and then they would inherit all of the permissions and all the objects that they could access, so on and so forth, because of the permissions assigned to that group. It's not the same way in Linux. In Linux, you got to take an extra step here. So we need to first create a directory that would belong to the group. So in this particular case, I'm just going to go back to our roots home directory here. And we just need to make sure that we create a specific path to a shared directory for this specific group. So for example, we're just gonna, actually I'll even go one more up, so we're inside of this like root folder that's over here, and then now we see that we have the root user that's inside of here, as well as a bunch of various different groups as well. So we can make a directory here, and we will call this the tech users. And then now we can check to see if that exists, and now we have a directory called tech users. So what we need to do is we need to give access to the tech users directory, excuse me, we need to change the ownership of the tech users directory by using the change ownership command. So this is another new command that you're using, learning, excuse me. So chown, very similar to change mode, which was chmod. Chown is changing ownership. So we're going to change ownership to the tech group, and we're going to change it for the folder tech users. So now the tech users group, so if I do lsl, we should be able to see, hopefully, that the tech users group have right here, boom. So we see that the tech users group have the group ownership of tech. So the group tech actually owns the tech users group. And now what we can do is we can change the permissions of the tech users group, and we can start giving them various permissions or remove various permissions from them. So I can do now a change mode command, and I can give group permissions, read and write, to the tech users group, or the tech users folder, right? This is a shared folder that everybody in the group tech actually has access to. So now we can verify the ownership of this, and then we see that they have all of these permissions that's been added to the tech users group. Now they can read, they can write, they can execute everything that's inside of this thing, and that is a great environment. So now we've done multiple things, right? So we created a new user, we added the user to the tech group, and now we assigned, we created a new shared folder for the tech group. Then we changed the ownership of the tech group, or the tech folder, excuse me, the tech users folder. We changed the ownership, the group ownership of the tech users folder to the tech group, and then we change the permissions of that. So now everybody that has access to this will have access to that specific group as their main shared folder, and then they get access to all the files inside of that, and then everything else they don't have access to, right? So hopefully that actually makes sense. So we created a new user using the user add. We made sure that their password expires using the password expiry option. We added that new user to a new group called tech, and this is our group, right? Then we added a shared folder for the tech group, and we made sure that we changed the ownership of this folder to the group tech, so that the group, so you see right here is root was the user that created it, and then the folder of the group that also owns this is actually the root group, right? So which means that these things are all owned by the root group as well as the root user. But in this particular case, this particular thing, it's owned by root, but then the tech group also has ownership of it. So anybody who's inside the tech group has ownership of this in this entire folder, and they can do essentially all of the permissions that have been assigned to this group. they can do it. Anybody, as long as they belong to the tech group, they can also do those permissions. That's basically what we've done here. So that's all the stuff that we just did. So now we can do house cleaning, right? We just got to make sure that we remove all of the things that we just did. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete or remove the tech users directory. So it's a directory. I think it's actually directory. It's not remove, but it's like, how do we delete a directory? I got to remind myself. I'm sorry, it's remove directory. So it's not a file. Remove only works for a file. So if you want to remove a directory, it's remove dir, and then we do tech users. There we go. And now we've been able to remove tech users. So let's just make sure that it's not there anymore, and it is no longer there anymore. So now what we want to do is we want to delete everything else that we did, right? So we want to delete the group that we just made. There we go. And now we want to delete the user that we just made. And there we go. And there should no longer be a group called Hank H. So let's just make sure that that's also true. So cat etc. And let's see if we have a Hank H group, which I don't think we do. Yeah, he's gone. The user is gone, the group is gone, all that stuff is gone because we changed his primary group as well. But we can always do cat etc group and then pipe that into the grep command and see if we can find Hank H, and we can. So we made sure that that was deleted as well. So we deleted our user, we deleted our group, we deleted the shared folder that was assigned to them, and just like that we are back to normal. We're back to the regular standard position that we were when we started this exercise. And just like that, we have wrapped our Linux tutorial, Linux SysAdmin tutorial. So we went from very, very basic commands to start the whole thing, and we got into some more advanced commands and ultimately ended up with user provisioning, group provisioning, and doing a lot of great things as a Linux administrator, as a system admin for Linux. And I did create a specific file that automates a lot of these things. There's actually multiple files. So there's the file that automates the creation of new users inside of the Linux environment. There's a file that creates new users inside of the Windows Active Directory environment. And then there's the version of it where we work with the API of Azure AD because it's cloud-based, and a lot of companies use Azure Active Directory to provision their users. So there's also an automation file that includes that. So all of that stuff is provided to our members for the SysAdmin group, the membership group at Hackaholics Anonymous under the SysAdmin tier, which I believe is tier number 2. They get access to all of those automations because it's one of the perks that I love providing to our members, is that I just create a lot of these automations for them. So this is actually something that is provided to all of our tier 2 SysAdmin members, and they're going to be getting access to that. So it's great that you know all of these things. Now you should know exactly how to do all of these things manually, but when you go into a large environment and you work at a company, they're going to probably want to do this dozens of times, hundreds of times. You probably need to do this repetitively all the time, and it's just time consuming. And sometimes when your mind is cluttered or something, you forget to do certain parts of this process. And when you create an automation script, it just guarantees that every single part of that process is done, and it's done properly. That's why I like automation. So that's one of the things that I think is very, very important in this regard, is that it's good to know exactly how to do this, but it's also good to know how to automate all of this stuff. So this was the first step for you. I'm going to create more videos around Linux system administration as well as Windows system administration. But from now on, since we have this one, and this was kind of like a beginners to intermediate type of environments, what we're going to do is in the future videos is we're going to be working on more advanced sysadmin stuff in Linux and ultimately in Windows as well. So this was basically it for our Linux tutorial of the command line and how to be a sysadmin inside of Linux. If you got any value from this tutorial, or if you've gotten any kind of value from this channel, I do encourage you to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so that you get notified the next time that a video comes out. And of course, I would love to hear from you in the comment section. This video came out because somebody in our comment section requested a video about Linux administration and becoming a sysadmin. So I was like, hey, you know what? That's actually a really good idea. Let's go talk about that and let's go create a video about that. So that's basically how this video came out. So go ahead and thank that user. His name is David. I don't know what his full username is, but he's actually one of our community members inside of Hackaholics Anonymous as well. And he wanted to have more scripts on this. So I was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to create videos for you guys. We created scripts for them. So that's all going to be accessible to them. I listen to the community. It's the point that I'm trying to make. So if you drop a comment and you make a request for some kind of content, I will listen and I will do my very best to create that content for you. So that's how this video came up. So hopefully you found value from it, and if you did, I would like for you to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell and join our community of amazing professionals who are trying to become sysadmins and ethical hackers and cybersecurity analysts, so on and so forth. It's your boy Hank Hackerson at Hank Hacks Hackers, your favorite network and system attacker / protector. Love, peace, and chicken grease. If no one else loves you, Hank loves you, and I will see you in the next video. Later.